thank you for being here. We are honored to have with us today Brigadier General David Smith, who, as you will see, has quite the storied history working through aviation and other things. So let's get right to it. Okay, so last weekend, I know the answer. How many of us participated in some way in the air show? All right, well, just a few photographs up here. You know, we gave rides. So here's Rob giving a ride. There's a young man, Nobby, working on the PBJ as we're guiding it. A couple of our great airplanes from our Commonwealth brethren. And I would like to point out, this is really important that you know, this is our pilot of the PT, but I do want you to know that the airplane's on the ground while he's napping. Is that the one that went viral, Rob? Okay. As it should have. But did you say I'm on the ground? Okay, and some others. A couple of our fighters out here, Twilight picture. They flew wonderfully in the air show. There's our magnificent PBJ against some more airplanes as we got ready for the day. Our Zero. And doesn't really look like attacking an airfield in the South Pacific, but that's our PBJ coming back into land after a successful ride flight. Enough about me. Okay, so with us today, Brigadier General David Smith is a special assistant to the Commanding General of the California State Guard, where he supports Title 32, actions for the readiness, effectiveness, and integration of the California State Guard into the California Army and Air National Guards. He is also the Chief Executive Officer of the Mojave Air and Spaceport, not too far up the road right here, which is a renowned flight research center that the latest and most advanced aeronautical designs as part of its cadre of aircraft and aviation-related activities up there. He was previously the director of the multi-billion-dollar Air Force production and flight test facility, Plant 42, up at Palmdale Airport. General Smith entered the Air Force in 1982 and flew B-52's at numerous locations. His many accomplishments include earning the coveted Fairchild Trophy, an achievement recognized by then President Ronald Reagan. He was handpicked from all the B-52, B-1, and FB-111 crews to accompany General Chain, who at the time was the Commander-in-Chief of the Strategic Air Command. And he was chosen to represent the Strategic Air Command Alert Forces, receiving the David C. Schilling Award for the year's most outstanding contribution to flight. He was also deployed for combat duty in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Dr. Smith has a PhD in business administration, specializing in aviation, and he is married to the former Denise Cook. They have 6 children and 8 grandchildren. Please welcome General David Smith.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. But I've got to tell you in all seriousness, and many of you that may have served or serve in your own capacity one way or another, whether it be in or out of uniform, know that it's never about you, right? If I had any success in my career and in my background, it's because I've been surrounded by wingmen that have lifted me up every day of my life. And some of those moments I find a little emotional, so I'm not without emotion, and if I do, you're just getting it because it's here, right? So, why does this guy join the Air Force? Well, I don't know. I came from an Army family, and why did Dad join the Army? Well, he didn't know. Actually, he was drafted. He had an interesting job. He ran the bars and restaurants at a little hotel down here called the Beverly Wilshire today. And his customers, his regulars, were people like Mickey Rooney and Barbara Hutton, Johnny Weissmuller, and he loved it. He did not want to go to the Second World War, but he got drafted. And as he tells the story in training, he was offered to be selectively pulled out along with 4 other soldiers to go to officers' candidacy school. Now, I don't think my father ever saw the inside of a college, and it's questionable whether he ever graduated from high school. But nonetheless, he was selected for officers' training school. So, you know, as a proud kid at home, as Dad's sharing the story, I looked at him and says, well, that's great. You got to be an officer. He says, oh, no. He said, there's only one reason I fell out and went to officers' training school, is that the alternative was a 20-mile hike in full battle gear. And I just didn't want to go on the damn walk. And I said, but you got to be an officer. And he explained something to me that I didn't quite understand. He said, you got to remember, I wasn't excited about military service. I was there because I was drafted. And what we don't understand today is, you know what happens to lieutenants in the Second World War? They died. They died at inordinate numbers. Both our adversaries knew that to defeat the force, you had to take out company-level leadership, tactical leadership in the field, so that the soldiers would crumble in place. And he said, as such, when you look at the horrific loss of life throughout the Second World War and Korea, Vietnam as well, you find an inordinate high percentage of mid-level NCOs and company-grade officers who gave their life for the country. Fortunately, he didn't give his life, although he was in Patton's Third Army and helped relieve a little place called Bastogne. Came back from war and decided, maybe I'm not going back to bartending. And he made the Army a career. It was a different military back then, and I want to talk a little about the military transition. This is the story of Dad. One of the reasons he may have stayed in the military after the conflict portion of the Second World War, going into the Reconstruction phase, worked for General Hanging Sam. And while working for this general, Dad, by the way, hates doctors, hates hospitals, just hates them. And I've seen that in many people of his age and era, right? By the way, he passed away about 2 years ago at 100. Wonderful life, proud soldier. Full honors. But he came down as sick as he's ever been, and he realized the problem is I can't get my boots on or off. If he could get his boots on, he would have just kept going to duty. But he went to a field hospital. Doctor looked at him. I guess the symptoms of diphtheria must be very pronounced. I don't know what they are. I don't have the medical background in my doctorate. As my wife says, yeah, my husband's a doctor, but not the kind that helps anybody. So goes into his field hospital. The doctor points to a corpsman and says, Corpsman, lock that door. This soldier's got diphtheria. We're quarantined. He was quarantined with a young lieutenant, Teresa Seluzicki, who was an Army nurse. Teresa Seluzicki, about 2 years prior to this time, was in Baltimore and tried out for, back then in 1943, sort of their version of America's Got Talent, right? So did her song and dance routine on stage, and the first place prize was a screen test in Hollywood, California. And she won. And they were awarding her her screen test, and she said, well, thank you very much, but I can't go. You see, I'm a lieutenant in the United States Army, and I'm a nurse, and I'm deploying to combat operations in Europe. And she was a battlefield nurse. So it's fortunate for me that Teresa Seluzicki was quarantined with my father, because they fell in love, got married, and that's now Teresa Smith, my mom, who also passed away a few years ago. But like I said, the world changes, and I want to talk about the changing military. That's why I refer to my parents. See, when they married, my mother was called in by her commander. I love that sound. She's called in by her commander and said, Lieutenant Smith, it's time for you to resign your commission. You're no longer an officer, you're no longer a soldier, and you're no longer a nurse. Your job is to be an officer's wife. But that was the world then. The Army didn't understand joint spouse assignments. They didn't understand women in combat. They didn't understand these essential rules that the fairer side of us as humans can really bring to the fight and make us better. Mom might have been just a little ahead of her time because that sort of pissed her off. But later, when they came back from Europe, she went back to nursing as a civil servant. And when she passed away, it's interesting how we take care of our own. She wanted to be, I've got 2 brothers at Arlington. She wanted to be co-interred with her sons. And it took almost a year to get that paperwork done. Disturbing a grave is not done lightly, and it has to be done correctly. So all the brothers and family members had to provide notarized statements and that it was okay with them. I finally got this call. I was a colonel at the time. A woman from Arlington National Cemetery calls and says, Colonel, I'm so-and-so. I want to tell you that Lieutenant Smith's interment at Arlington has been approved, and I have some details I need to go over with you, and then we'll schedule a day. Sure. And this woman says, so, understanding that Teresa was a Roman Catholic, there will be a Roman Catholic military priest there. You will have a private reception area at Arlington where the family can gather with clergy. We will have formal military escorts when you're ready that will take you out. There will be a company of soldiers. There will be a horse-drawn caisson. There will be a cavalry escort, and of course the color guard. We will go graveside. We will do the graveside interment of your mom. There will be a firing party, a flag folding ceremony and presentation, and then we will dismiss you and escort you back with your soldiers to the receiving area where you'll have time as a family to just take as long as you want. And I said, the uneducated colonel, well, you know, ma'am, Teresa was a pretty simple woman. She was just an Army nurse. And I know, sadly, how busy you are right now. So if you want to pull back the throttles just a hair, you can probably go ahead and do that. The family will be fine with it. This lady says, Sir, your mother was a lieutenant in the United States Army. She has earned everything this country is doing for her. Do you have any questions for me, sir? I said, no, ma'am. We're good. So the ceremony was remarkably respectful and touching. But something I didn't know as the dumb colonel at the time, and I should have known this because I think it's very powerful. You know, they don't close the grave while you're there. So at the end of the flags folding and presentation, as we're about to be escorted back, I noticed a soldier. By the way, it was July at Arlington. It's hot. It's muggy. Soldiers in full dress uniform at attention graveside. And I went over, my wife saying, don't do it. But I went over and just said, please convey my compliments to your command. Thank you for taking care of my mother. He doesn't bat an eye. He doesn't crack a smile. He doesn't nod his head. So about 50 meters back on what I'd call a little IV line, a little ridge, was an NCO. Again, full dress uniform. And I went over to him and said the same thing. The young NCO just quietly nodded and said, "Yes, sir, it would be an honor. Sorry for your loss." So I went back in, escorted to that waiting room, and I went to the lady who had made that first phone call to me. And I said, "I'm curious what those two soldiers are doing there." And she says, "You see, we never leave a soldier alone. Until that grave is closed, there will be an NCO and a soldier standing watch on that grave 24 hours a day. That soldier is never alone." That is the traditions we have in our military. And why it took me till the tender young age of 27 to figure out I want to be part of that team, don't quite know. But it was an accident of fate. I'm going to be very careful to not proselytize. I will just choose to say that I do believe there's a Lord out there, and I believe it works in mysterious ways, and sometimes we just got to kind of figure out how to follow that. So I worked for a company some of you might have heard of in Hawaii called Jack Daniel's Distillery. And a great company to work for. Great company. By the way, the Air Force is pretty hard on alcohol-related events. I will tell you, Jack Daniel's is harder. They believe there's a fine sipping Tennessee whiskey, and the easiest way to get fired is get drunk. You're just wrong. They won't deal with you. But I worked for them for about 3 years doing visual merchandising and marketing, and got a phone call from the distillery, and phone calls that start off like this usually aren't good. "Hey, Jack Daniel's is going through a right-sizing. You see, we've been bought out by a major liquor conglomerate called Brown-Forman, and we've looked and we just can't justify 2 reps in Hawaii. Frank's been with us 27 years. You've been with us for 2, 3. And so you're probably at the end of the fiscal year going to be laid off, but we're going to work a severance package and give you a great recommendation. We'll part as friends." And I walked out to the mailbox that day, and there was a little brochure that said, "Aim high." And I thought, well, I've never joined the Air Force before. Let's give it a run. And it was literally that simple. So I loved the journey I was on. And I thought maybe, just maybe, I could satisfy a childhood dream that I had chosen to set aside. And that childhood dream was rooted in the National Geographic magazine. At Fort Shafter in Hawaii, me as a 5 or 6-year-old, Dad running military clubs, so he kind of routed back to that bar and restaurant world, but in uniform. Well, I would voraciously grab the National Geographic whenever it came in, because there was a series of articles going on about crazy people in Southern California, that in a place nobody would ever think about wanting to live, they were flying an airplane higher and faster than had ever been done before, X-15. It amazed me. And I thought, gosh, somehow in my life, if I could touch that mission, I'll be complete. Well, as time went through in my tenure in the Air Force, I had opportunities to crew with great people, do a lot of amazing things, and frankly, for the first 12 years of that time, sit an awful lot of global alert. So we had a little thing going on back then called the PSYOP, a bunch of letters that were single integrated operational plan. In other words, nuclear war. So 1 out of every 3 weeks, I would live on the end of the runway for 7 days next to a fully loaded bomber, B-52, with, well, let's just say if we ever launched in anger, that one airplane became the 3rd most powerful country in the world. So amazing lethality that thank God we never had to execute. But sitting alert made you think about the horrors of war, but more importantly, that deterrence works. And I think it's important because that's a theme that I'd like to have continue through the short time I have with you. Deterrence works, and we want it to work today. We have an adversary out there that has stated that in 2026, they're going to take Taiwan. We may, as a nation, choose to say that's untenable. We may not. I don't know. What I do know is if we maintain a posture of strength, maybe they realize this is just not a smart decision. And that strength has to be rooted in our military forces and in the support of the American people behind our military forces. We saw during the horrors of Vietnam that the strategy of Hanoi worked. You see, they read Sun Tzu, they understood asymmetric warfare, and they understood that they would never beat the U.S. military in the field. But they could turn the American people against their own military, and when they succeed in doing that, the military basis will collapse because it'll lose political support. Very smart, very effective. So, alert wraps up. I move on to a few different jobs. Got in the U-2 world for a while, the SR-71 world. We brought the SR-71 back, an awesome aircraft, but it's remarkably expensive. And as capable as it was, we couldn't get the SR-71 to data link, whereas the U-2 could. And even at the awesome speeds of an SR-71, the fact that we had to fly it back home, land, download the intel package, process the intel, then get it back in theater, simply was old news to commanders who needed data today. But a remarkable mission nonetheless. Left there and had my eyes open in 3 years with amazing soldiers of the United States Army out at a place called the National Training Center, Fort Irwin. I have 30 rotations in the desert as the senior Air Force Brigade trainer out there teaching close air support. And I hope, really hope, that some of the things we did in working with our soldiers getting ready to go to war saved lives in Iraq. And I think it did. Because we saw the devastating use of air power, especially in the close fight, when we liberated Kuwait, or went through Kuwait. So, after those 3 years with the United States Army, I knew I was coming up for an assignment, and I got this phone call from the Air Force Personnel Center, and I knew my expert down there quite well. We had flown together years ago. My go-by, my call sign's Jester. Calls me up and says, "Hey, Jester, I've got a BNR, by name request, for you. Are you interested?" I said, "It depends. Where? What am I doing?" And he says, "Well, the commander of the 419th out at Edwards wants you to come out there and run the B-52 AMI program, Avionics Midlife Improvement." And I kind of did. We're doing a midlife improvement program on a 50-year-old jet. Right. Yeah. And he says, "No, I'm serious." And I said, well, you're not giving me quite the right data because you want an OT guy there. I qualify for operational test, but you're telling me this is an experimental, a DT position in AFMC. And he said, "That's right, it is." And I said, "Well, I'm not a test pilot school graduate. I can't go there." And he says, "No, they've already got that worked out. We're sending you to National Test Pilot School in Mojave. And from there, you will come over and run the B-52 program." The commander at the time I had flown with at Fairchild, and we had had great relationships together, but we had lived through some dark times up there when we lost airplanes and people. But his name was Arnie Bunch. He later became 4-star General Arnie Bunch, the commander of Air Force Materiel Command. Remarkable human being. I just don't know that his judgment in picking people for assignments is that good, because he chose me. But it was amazing. After I accepted that assignment and hung up the phone, I actually shed a little tear because a 5- and 6-year-old's dream reading a National Geographic is going to come to life. And you can take that box that you shoved in the back of the closet called your dream box, where you said, yeah, that'll never happen to me, and pull it out and dust that baby off and go, it's Christmas. You know? So I loved getting involved in that mission. More importantly, because, again, surrounded by amazing people that do amazing things in delivering combat capability to those who are going to take that thing into the fight and giving it to them right. Understand that our B-52 is still the mainstay of the bomber force. We are currently accompanied by 2 low bingo numbers, B-1s and B-2s. They're both scheduled to retire. Our bomber force will be B-21s and B-52s. And we're expecting to do that just for the next 40 years. I, in my career, have flown with an individual that was a 3rd-generation B-52 pilot. It's going to go 40 more years. It's an amazing system, amazing aircraft. Bill Boeing did us good in that one. A remarkable capability. It's been an honor to do that. As things drew to a close with my military career at about the 28, 29-year point, I needed uniform methadone, and I got this rare opportunity to take command of a unit in the Guard. And I thought, why not? A weekend a month? That's about right. Fortunately or unfortunately, based on your point of view, I got promoted. And my wife has reminded me on a not so irregular basis that that weekend a month we talked about is the one weekend you're home a month. Because with your responsibilities now, you seem to be drilling every weekend. And I kind of am, right? But I must say, working with our guardsmen, our citizen soldiers, is a humbling experience, and they bring a remarkable capability to the fight. I'll highlight one of those. While in Iraq, I had an MP unit that supported me because my job there was to move around the 7 top Iraqi officials, what were called the Tier 1s. So if the president, at that time it was President Talabani, wanted to go on vacation, I provided the security, the oversight, the mission planning, so sort of like a Secret Service detail with National Command Authority. And I had an Army MP company assigned to me. We had, by nature of the mission, unfortunately, some negative consequences. We'll leave it at that. Because these top 7 Iraqis, the reality is some bad guys really want them dead. And some young Americans made that not happen. So this company that came in to take over was a Boston Army National Guard company. Now, I've got to tell you, many of the soldiers there on Petraeus' staff were not excited about this. They said, you know, we just can't have a Guard unit come in here and replace this regular active duty MP company. Guard unit had 0 incidents over there. So I met with their commander just before I came back and said, is there a reason why we're doing so well? And he says, yeah, don't you know what my guys do for a living? They're all Boston street cops. The unfortunate truth is the average soldier MP doesn't have the street experience of just being a cop in the trenches dealing with bad people every day. All these Boston street cops could see that you're a hazard, you're not. They knew it. It was instinct to them. So an amazing thing that we bring to that fight, and it's been exciting. The civil service side, getting to be the installation director at Edwards was remarkable, but then going to Plant 42, an eye-opening experience. So Plant 42, shortest part of the presentation because nothing happens there. Yeah. Actually, everything happens there. It was remarkable to go into that office and start digging into the mission and realize there's 16,000 contractors out there delivering tomorrow's capability of the United States Air Force in this multi-billion-dollar 5,600-acre campus. And seeing the integration of Northrop, Lockheed, and Boeing and the work they're doing. Every F-35 mid-body in the world, from all branches of the service, comes out of Plant 42. We turn out an F-35 mid-body every 1.3 days. We deliver an airplane to the warfighter. That mid-body is all the guts of the airplane. It goes to Dallas, they stick the wings and tail on it, plug an engine in the back, and fly it away, right? But that's the capability Plant 42 is delivering. And of course, publicly, we've released that the B-21 is being developed there. And that comes with an interesting story on its own. I was at the Airspace and Cyberspace Conference with my deputy 4 years ago, while this was still a black program. And the Secretary of the Air Force, Frank Kendall, was speaking. And his opening line was, at a little town named Palmdale at a place called Plant 42, we have five B-21 Raiders in final assembly about to go to flight test. My deputy leaned over and said, "Boss, isn't that classified?" And I leaned back and said, "Not anymore." Yeah. There are about 10,000 people in the room, and it was televised. But that's the kind of thing, yep, there's things at Plant 42 we can't talk about, but they're also doing exciting civil work. NASA and Lockheed building the low boom demonstrator to prove that we can do supersonic flight over populated areas and only have the signature of closing a door. Boeing and NASA working on a truss brace wing demonstrator that'll reduce fuel consumption on airlines by upwards of 10%. Amazing things, not to mention all the military programs going on. All the Global Hawks come out of there, a lot of amazing work. So as things were wrapping up and the need for a change was present, I had this opportunity to go up to Mojave and become their CEO. It is an amazing place, and having done test pilot school there, it was a bit like a homecoming for me. The civil sector is remarkable. Our military is awesome. But I truly believe that what makes the country great isn't the military force. We may guarantee it, but what makes the country great is free enterprise and that civil market that we have out there. And there's a confluence of technologies. We see the other end of it right here in this room of where the aerospace industry is going that's amazing. We have the Boom supersonic demonstrator that's going to fly, I can't tell you when, next week at Mojave. We are working on with the company that is bringing out lifting body blended wing technology to the airline industry that, okay, truss brace wing, 10% reduction. They're looking at 50% reduction in fuel consumption. And oh, by the way, very comfortable seating on the aircraft as we spread that passenger base out into the wings of a lifting body. Amazing stuff. Amazing capabilities. This is such an honor to be a part of an environment that's doing that kind of stuff. So I'd like to wrap up with some very quick stories. And what I want to touch on is the fact that I may not be active duty now. I am a guardsman. But the reality is our military has made some very real sacrifices for us. And I think it's important we not forget that. And this isn't about me. It's about the we that I've been honored and blessed to serve with and around. You know, a guy named Arnold was a petty officer on the submarine Argonaut stationed at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked. Arnold is, in Hawaiian parlance, my Hanaid mother's father. So call him my Hanaid maternal grandfather. Hanaid is an informal adoption in the Hawaiian culture. Like many submariners, he went to sea after Pearl Harbor was attacked to hold off the thought of a Japanese invasion that had to be coming next. Chief Petty Officer Arnold, as the Navy says, is still on patrol. Submarine lost contact somewhere off the coast of Rabaul. And I won't say, because my Hanide mom, Mary, corrects me on it. "No, Dave, he didn't die for this country. He is still on patrol." Or a guy named Peralta, who Denise and I had the rare opportunity. The adjutant general was busy and called me up and said, "I need you to go to San Diego this weekend. They're bringing a ship to life. It's the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer Peralta. And I need you to represent the California Military Department and the governor." I said, "Yes, sir," because that's the only thing you do when a two-star calls you up, right? Amazing ceremony. I'd never seen such precision. These sailors were absolutely awesome bringing that ship to life. But more awesome was hearing in the very broken English of his mother, that was a first-generation immigrant to the United States, that she was so honored that her son could serve in our United States Marine Corps, because he served because he thought it might be a path to citizenship and a way to permanently stay in the United States of America. He so loved this country, as he loved his other Marines, that when that grenade came into his battle position in Fallujah, he huddled that thing to his chest and basically must have thought, "Today I will not visit death on my Marines. This is my road to travel." Awesome responsibility, awesome gift to our country, because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and guardians don't seem to have good command of the English language. You see, at the end of the day, they don't understand how to say no. You know, when somebody says, "Hey, there's frozen tundra in Korea and you're going to be totally surrounded and you won't have food or bullets at the chosen reservoir, but you must hold this position to the last Marine," our Marine Corps said, "Yes, sir." Or when a young, wild pararescueman in Vietnam was on a day off. And by the way, his story is interesting because he was not a classic airman. He was a bit of a carouser. Might have drank too much, might have saw the ladies a little too much. And it was a day off, but an Army company came under severe North Vietnamese attack. And they said, "Is there any chance you can go?" And he said, "Hey, grab my weapon and my kit." Hopped on a helicopter. Helicopter couldn't get the wounded out, the wind's in the trees, so he said, "That's okay, put me on the ground." And he started caring for soldiers, laying down grazing fire, and holding his position. And they say after the third time he refused to be exfilled because there was wounded he had to care for and he was in a fight. That's when he took his first round. And sometime shortly thereafter, he was killed in action. They found his remains the next day with his medical kit in one hand and his weapon in the other. Congressional Medal of Honor for just an airman who gave the last full measure. Our men and women of the armed services are making sacrifices like this every day. You know that. I know that. I've seen the people around me that live that. And it's just very humbling to be part of that team as we've looked at these changes. So the final change we need to talk about is I've seen three really big moves in the military that I'd like to highlight. When I was at Fort Irwin, most of our military was based on what we called force on force. This was going to be the Fulda Gap. This was going to be the major tank battle. This was going to be the surface fight backed up by the air. We moved from there into a counterinsurgency fight. We got smaller. We're moving again back into a global power competition. We have very real near peers out there that we have to be strong enough to fight against, because the reality is they're moving faster than we are, especially in areas like hypersonics. So we have got to strap this thing on and get ready. or we're going to find ourselves in another fight. And the only way out of it, as I mentioned in the beginning, is a gigantic deterrent posture. So look, it's been absolutely an honor to spend time with you today. I think I have a couple minutes for questions. I don't want to take too much time here. Anybody have anything? Yes, sir.
You mentioned that you entered the Air Force kind of rooted in that dream you had as a National Geographic reading kid. But how did you make it into a cockpit?
Okay.
There's a second part of that question. What other experience might you have had, with aircraft and flying, when you reach your age of 27 before you entered?
So interestingly, that's actually very substantial to what the background I have. I went to high school at a place called Maryknoll in Hawaii. Maryknoll at the time had a Civil Air Patrol cadet group. All male students, we hadn't quite got to the transition we are at yet today, all male students had to participate in Civil Air Patrol. So at 15, I got my first sortie in a Cessna 150, and I fell in love. So when I made the decision to join the United States Air Force, the United States Air Force said, hey, you got a chemistry degree, but you're not an engineer. And the only thing we're accepting right now is air crew and engineers from the street to go to officers training school. So they said, if you don't make it in the cockpit, you're walking. So fight was on, right? Now it's a challenge. And you said you had a second part of your question?
I lumped them all together.
Oh, good. Thank you. Anything else?
Yep. Here's a question for you.
General, you mentioned your tremendous respect for the ground fighter and your work at the NTC and for close air support. As we move further on with technology, are we doing our warfighter on the ground a disservice with some of this technology and making everything a multi-role environment? There's a lot of talk about all these aircraft that are going away, that technology can take care of all that. What are your thoughts on that?
So interesting. By the way, I don't give company line feedback. I give my feedback. So I'm not speaking for the United States Air Force. I'm speaking for Dave Smith. I love the A-10 Warthog. It's a mistake to retire that jet. We will pay that price. To address it, I'll tell you a quick story that came out of the director of the Combined Task Force that was delivering the early EMD F-35s to the United States. He had backgrounds in F-22s before he came to the F-35 program. He said, when we bought the F-22, we bought a Ferrari. We paid a ton of money for the best there was, and it's still the best fighter in the world. The first F-22 engagement out at Red Flag, we threw the best we had up against a 4-turn 4 of F-22s. They were up against fighter weapons school graduates flying Vipers and Eagles. They were up against Navy, Top Gun, FA-18s. They were up against the best in our inventory. And we stacked them up against 16 airplanes. The F-22s never turned because all 16 were engaged and shot down on the first go. And oh, by the way, there's not a single shot on an F-22 because they were never seen. Technology is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't do everything. He says, so we bought that Ferrari. Awesome. When we bought the F-35, we kind of bought a Toyota. We bought something that is sort of a jack of all trades and really maybe not a master of one. So we've kind of got a multi-role thing going on here, but the thought that it can replace everything, I think, is a mistake. And I think we have to rely at the end of the day on basic warfighting. On my 30 rotations out there at NTC, I saw the Blue Force win twice. Quite a scoreboard. 28. Back then it was the Krasnovian army, was the organic army. 28 wins for the bad guys, 2 wins for the good guys. But the good guys have all this ordnance. Why? Because they didn't know how to employ it effectively. Both times the Blue Forces won and were successful, it was because they employed CAS effectively. devastating battlefield-changing maneuvers. One of them, and I dwell on little war stories, I hope it kind of answers your question, was sort of amazing to me as the senior brigade trainer because I'm there in my battle rattle with my notebook, watching this Army brigade commander direct how they're going to fight the fight tomorrow. And invariably back then, the Army kind of disregarded CAS because it was difficult to integrate, and I had to fire artillery, and I had all this Army stuff I had to do. Why would I worry about the air, right? This guy comes out and he says, so, when are we LDing? 0500. So are we firing smoke? Yes, we are, 450. Okay, when the smoke hits, what's the enemy armor going to do? They're going to move from hide site to battle position. Points to the ALO and he says, I need CAS on station at 455. As soon as those tanks start moving, we need to hit them with close air support while they're mobile. You see, from the air, you can see things that are moving. It's hard to see things stationary. And he says, so what are they going to do the minute you start hitting them? Well, they're going to stop because they're harder to see. Great, what are they then? They're an artillery target. FSO, have the 155s, have the Paladins ready by 5 o'clock because as soon as those tanks are engaged with CAS, they're going to stop. And as soon as those aircraft break lock, we need to hammer them with artillery because why? What are they going to do? Well, once they get hammered with artillery, they're going to move. What are we going to do? We're going to roll the A-10s back in. We're going to start rifling at them. These guys, the Krasnovians, were fit to be tied. In the brigade talk, they actually came out and said, this is unfair. Oh, yeah? It's a fight, guys. You know? Right. So that integration of technology is an amazing thing, but we have to maintain the basic warfighting skills. And I think disregarding some of our elements that do that very well, Warthog, could be a mistake. Let's do one more question, if you don't mind. Sir.
So on the note of that, why hypersonics? Why the lean towards ultra high-end, low-density assets in favor of, instead of delivering low-price, high-breadth assets?
So, interesting. You mentioned Silver Bullet. I'll go back to another line, last year's Airspace and Cyberspace Conference. I don't remember which GO was talking at the time, but 4-star general. Anyhow, he says, with hypersonics, the nature of warfighting is changing. Imagine that you're on an Aegis-class cruiser at sea, and this weapons guy looks at the captain on the bridge and says, sir, you need to push that button in the next 2 seconds or we all die. Well, what does normal Navy, Army, Air Force, Marine, disciplined battle tactics say? Hey, I've got a threat coming in. Let's convene the battle staff. Let's get together in the ward room. Let's have a discussion. We'll build some slides. We'll do a PowerPoint presentation. We'll talk about this. We'll have some coffee. And we'll eventually make a decision. Except you're all dead. The speeds of the battlefield are changing dramatically. I will tell you that other countries are ahead of us in that. And they're seeing this as a game changer for tomorrow. It brings a remarkable sense of speed to the fight when you're talking about weapon systems that are moving through the air at twice the speed of a 30-06 round. Amazing, hard to think of. This gentleman had his hand up, so if you don't mind.
I hate to end with this question, but we hear and see and read about the effect of woke on the military. I don't even know how to say it or what it is. Has it been an effect on the military?
Yes.
Operation?
Yes. There are some goods and bads there. The way my mom was treated at the end of the Second World War was wrong. Every woman with credentials and ability to support this great nation should serve equally alongside of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine that happen to be born male. But when we try to embrace everything all at once, I think we sometimes forget some of our core values and disciplines that make us great. Now, I am an absolute advocate for equality, but I'm also fiercely jealous of women because they have that ability to bring human life into the world. And that capability should be embraced versus cast aside in favor of warfighting. Now again, I'm not saying women should not be warfighters. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying let's take our collective strengths and understand that what makes us great isn't sameness, but equality. We're not the same, but that doesn't mean we can't be equal. So let's be equal while we embrace the fact that we have differences. Let's look at different cultural identities and bring them in effectively. I don't care if my wingman is male, female, black, brown, or white. I care that my wingman tells me what I can't see and keeps Ivan off my six. That's what I care about.
Would you like to run the Mojave video?
Sure. So we got a short video here that talks to the Mojave Air and Spaceport, and I thought you might get a kick out of it. It's a little dated. Takes, I think, 3 or 4 minutes. But I hope you would enjoy it.
Test pilots are today and always have been since 100 years ago in the early days of aviation, a different breed. They're risk takers.
If you don't take the risk, then you just accept what you've got right now, and we come to a grinding halt.
They're willing to go into environments that there is a certain amount of unknown and literally test the edge of the envelope.
To become a great test pilot, one must venture into the unknown.
And the fact that they're willing to do so is what sets them apart.
The test pilots here are like gladiators entering into the arena. You have to be willing to get into the arena to be part of this community.
Without them, we can't continue to advance.
A great test pilot needs to be more than a job for them. They should have an insatiable quest to find out all they can.
The pilots that Mojave attracts are some of the most heroic people I've ever met. These individuals are truly risking their lives on a regular basis.
I think I have something that all test pilots fear, and it's the fear of failure.
The most dangerous part of our job is dealing with firsts.
Alan Shepard, when he became admiral, he wrote the test pilot's prayer, and it is, "Dear God, please don't let me foul up." Except he didn't use that word.
It's a career that brings some stress to your loved ones, and they always have that nagging feel in the back of their mind on whether you will come home.
But you also get a chance to prove your mettle, and if you're lucky, a place in history. And the record books are full of such achievements, and it only happens here.
The facilities at Mojave itself are first class. And of course its geographical position underneath the R2508 complex makes the airspace around here so easy to access.
It's got this great infrastructure, multiple runways, caliber of personnel that you'd only expect in a big city, but it's not a big city. It's out in a rural, small town environment with an attitude of getting things done.
In the local area there are lots of good alternative airfields as well, should anything go wrong at Mojave and we have to divert.
This is truly where most of the history of modern aviation and space industry is.
We have a very unique environment here of innovation and entrepreneurship. We give our companies permission to test freely, and we're here to provide the support necessary to make sure their businesses are successful.
Mojave is just simply a great place to be in the development of anything that's aerospace related. The environment, the culture, the regulatory capabilities here are perfect to provide us the flexibility as we develop our engines, as we develop our spacecraft, as we continue to test those.
Mojave has been a fantastic place for us as we've gone through the successes and challenges of test flying a spaceflight vehicle. The people here understand the challenges of spaceflight, and they also understand the importance of space to the future of humanity.
To me, this is the new frontier This is what's going to help change so much of not only our country, but the universe around. The things that we want to accomplish, it's happening right here in Mojave.
The spirit of the test pilot is truly the spirit of Mojave Air and Spaceport.
I am a test pilot.
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 So it's been an absolute honor to be with you today. Come visit me at Mojave. Up there, what I like to tell all my staff and everybody that comes through is permissions granted.